I think One Nation's been the only consistent political party for the last 20 years.
They're not talking about you. All right. Well, let me tell you, One Nation is talking about you.
It's like the media's run away from One Nation. They're too scared to ask us any questions, mainly because we're straight talkers and we've got the answers.
This is like a call to arms. You guys need to start making the real decisions and who you're going to vote for.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the ExCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp and I'm joined by Adam, Zahra and Rebecca Thompson. How are you guys going?
Good, thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, pretty good, thank you. And we got our leader on tonight, the Honourable Mark Latham. How are you going tonight, Mark?
Yeah, good, thanks, Stephen. Rebecca and Adam, good to be with you. I've heard a lot about this show, the ExCandidates, and I was way down your list of priorities to come on. So
no, you're at
it's
the top.
It's a case of finally cracking it.
You were at the top, but we actually had the plan to wait until Rebecca and Adam were endorsed, so you can kind of launch their campaigns. So that's the reason why we held off so long. So. We had that they were endorsed a couple of weeks ago at the Keep Them Honest fundraiser that we had out at Ingleburn RSL. Now, one of the things that you said there was that all politics is local. These days, with the bureaucracies and governments that they, federally and state, they want to have centralised control over everything. Do you want to just expand a little bit on what you mean by all politics is local?
Well, I suppose it's according to that slogan or maxim that Tip O'Neill, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives in the US, he coined that decades ago, all politics is local. I think it's become more local over the years because of disengagement. The public is not following politics the way we do. Most people have got other lives to live and they're quite disillusioned with the major political parties. We see that with the primary vote of Labor and Liberal falling. They're disillusioned with broken promises. Just now, you can see Albanese said he was going to bring down electricity prices and increase real wages. How's that going? So, broken promises break trust in the public's eye, and there's a growing proportion of people who turn to non-major parties like ours, hopefully at the next election in March, out of that disillusionment, wanting to try a different approach. But out of disillusionment with the major parties comes, I think, a tighter focus on the things that matter to people. If you're living in the suburbs or regions with children, you're focused on the education of your children, you're focused on cost of living, you're focused on law and order in your street. No one wants idiots climbing through your bathroom window, stealing things. You're focused on the quality of the roads and transport system, getting to and from work. I think all those things mean that politics has become increasingly local. And this is the challenge, of course. Most people who run for politics, for elected office, have got their own agenda and their own pet issues, if I can put it that way. But you never get elected unless you're relevant to the needs and concerns of the voters. And if those voters are worried about the quality of schooling, which you would be in New South Wales, the rising electricity prices, which are atrocious, the pressures on cost of living, the broken promises, the wokeness and growing madness of the major parties, well, they're all things that we need to address, and that's how One Nation campaigns in New South Wales, where we try to go mainstream and we try to go as local as possible.
Yeah, that's all true. What was I going to say as well with... with your local policies there, we've got, I just wanted to flick across actually to Brad Hazzard. And it's very entertaining to watch you guys. I mean, I don't know if it's entertaining for you, but it's entertaining for the people who watch the Hansard videos and the live parliamentary crosses and the bit of the sledging that goes on. The last one and the most recent one was where... Brad broke his own isolation rules, shaking hands with Adam Marshall. That's the one that's been going around probably in the last week. Is there anything? Did anything come of that, or do you just call him out on that because you're showing the people?
Well, the upper house is going to have a one-day hearing and inquiry into that on the 25th of November. So we want to get to the truth of what's gone on. I mean, Hazzard is very arrogant. Hazzard, Berejiklian and Chan went out there bossing everyone around for a long, long time. Millions of people were told, you must do this for vaccination, you must do that for workplace mandates, you must do this for isolation rules, you must do this for social distancing. I mean, nobody in the history of New South Wales has issued so many orders and instructions, directives, like some dictator, than Brad Hazzard. Mm-hmm. But what we do know is that the National Party budget dinner on the 22nd of June last year, he didn't follow his own rules because Adam Marshall was COVID infected. Hazzard walked into the function in Parliament House, what they call the strangers' dining room, from the northern end of the building, and he had a 5-6 minute conversation with Marshall and two witnesses about rolling out the vaccination program through pharmacies in country New South Wales. And we've got documents where Marshall told the contact tracers at the time, I'm standing next to Brad Hazzard. We had a conversation, and you'd think by that definition, Hazzard was a close contact and had to isolate for a fortnight. I mean, there were people on the other side of the room and the catering staff in Parliament House, people who didn't even come within a 10-metre radius of Adam Marshall, who had to isolate for a fortnight because they were classified as close contacts. So everyone, basically, except the Health Minister. And I raised this previously at budget estimates, and the head of the department, Susan Pearce, and their lackeys said, oh, no, well, for the minister, we did a sophisticated individual assessment. All those other ones, it was broad brush. They were in the room, so we sent them out for a fortnight, locked them in their houses for 14 days. But the minister had an individual assessment. An individual assessment is a really sophisticated thing based on which way were they facing, did anyone cough, how loud were they speaking, who breathed on whom. So anyway, we had called for the documents about this, and the lady who did the individual assessment on Hazzard was called Jenny Musto. We can't find anyone else where she did this special individual assessment. But we got her case notes, and they're 27 words of scribble on a bit of paper that don't even mention Adam Marshall. So it absolutely beggars belief that Adam Marshall tells the contact tracers basically he's a close contact to Brad Hazzard. They're standing in a small group. Hazzard has a lengthy conversation with Marshall and even physical contact with him. So you'd think, well, Marshall's told the contact tracers that Hazzard's a close contact. But Musto comes in to do the individual assessment and doesn't even mention that Brad Hazzard had any form of contact with Adam Marshall. In the 27 words, this scribble on a bit of paper, hardly sophisticated at all, Adam Marshall, infected at that time with COVID, is not even mentioned. So at a minimum, we have gross incompetence by the health department. And their claim to run this sophisticated individual assessment is poppycock. And I think everyone in New South Wales, one of the problems is the media don't focus on this because they practice access journalism. All those leaks about what was going to happen with COVID, it all came from Hazzard. And journalists have let Hazzard off the hook. But it's the role of the upper house to bring scrutiny to this. So we want to have a hearing where we test all these propositions with the witnesses who are there from the Pharmacy Guild, with Adam Marshall, with Kerry Chant and with Jenny Musto herself. Someone has got to explain how, if Adam Marshall told two contact tracers he had close contact with Brad Hazzard, how Hazzard was able to escape the rules, his own rules. And they've also got to explain how the individual assessment didn't even mention this contact with Adam Marshall. So at a minimum, it's gross incompetence. More likely, I would define it as a rort, where someone in the system, Hazzard, one of the health officials, has panicked and said, we're in the middle of a pandemic, we can't live without Brad, so we'll let Brad off the hook. Well, that's cold comfort for all those people out there who are barked at around New South Wales to follow the rules. And if the health minister, you've got one high responsibility in public life. If you set the rules, you yourself must follow them. Otherwise, it's another example of trust in the system breaking down. So I've been interrogating this. The media lackeys who just have the Hazzard leaks fed to them on a platter haven't shown any curiosity in it. But the upper house is there. We'll have the hearing on the 25th, and we're determined to get to the truth for every single one of the millions of people who followed the rules. And a lot of the rules were silly. I mean, we look back on it now and think, what sort of madness was it where they said, you can't stand up and have a beer? You get COVID if you're standing in a bar and have a beer. What sort of madness was it by which we locked little kids in their bedroom and told them society is just sitting there on a computer screen instead of going to school and mixing with their friends? So there was plenty of madness out there, and for every one of those people who suffered these rules, 90% of which were completely unnecessary, lockdowns, curfews, helicopters flying over the top of Fairfield like a police state. Well, the one bloke who seemed to escape the rules was Brad Hazzard, and I'm there to call him to account. And Adam, Rebecca and Stephen, you got one guarantee. When that clown throws the switch to abuse, it's because he knows he's as guilty as sin and he just wants to distract it. His tactic was, I can get Latham to blow up. He'll be the issue instead of me. Well, Brad, I've been around, and as I said to him at the first estimates, Brad, I've been insulted by professionals, and you're not in their league. You're not in their league with your gibberish and psychobabble. So I did my best to ignore that. But there was also something interesting that came out of the estimates, a second issue. I tested with Kerry Chant. I think this is very significant, that evidence at the European Parliament, where the Pfizer executive said at the beginning of the pandemic they had no evidence, no science that their vaccine was going to stop the transmission of COVID. And I said, well, what information did you get here in New South Wales from Pfizer or AstraZeneca, Moderna, any of them, that the vaccination program you rolled out was going to stop the spread? And Chant meandered, sounded like a filibuster. She just went on and on. But basically, she couldn't point to any evidence that the vaccination rollout, subject to draconian rules, losing your job and being locked in your home, was going to stop transmission. In the end, it didn't stop transmission, but people weren't told that. And I think that's scandalous as well, that these health officials never, and the politicians never released any of the health advice. No letters from Pfizer, no letters from AstraZeneca or Moderna, no advice printed down by Chant where they could be held accountable. They ran a police state without accountability, without evidence, without science. And I think the more we find out about that period, the worse it reflects on people like Hazzard, who thankfully is leaving the Parliament. And I think the fact we've busted him as a rorter about his own COVID rules without a marshal is part of the reason why he's cutting and running and leaving the New South Wales Parliament. Thank goodness.
Well, that's because once they leave Parliament, if they get caught being like guilty or fraudulent or whatever, they don't get as much punishment. Is that true?
Well, I mean, the punishment should be that you're sacked as health minister. Look at Boris Johnson, who had a few parties in number 10 Downing Street. He lost his job for breaking his own COVID rules. Well, the same standard should apply to Hazzard. Hazzard really, from that moment in June of last year, that he didn't go into 14 days isolation having had contact with Adam Marshall, he should never have been the health minister thereafter. It's a massive failing of the media, this access journalism, that they've shown no curiosity and an obvious breach. People who were at the National Party fundraising dinner were screaming about it. The media knew about it. They turned a blind eye because the lazy sods would rather get comfortable leaks from Brad Hazzard, the inside story about COVID, instead of doing their job. But anyway, the upper house, belatedly, we're doing our job, and we'll see how this hearing goes on the 25th of November.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
You spoke about accountability. Are we ever going to see the health advice where they spoke about ad nauseum?
Well, probably not. I don't look. If the Jenny Musto 27 words of scribble on a bit of paper is sophisticated health science, then you might as well go ask some 6-year-old kid in the schools to write it up. I don't think they've had any sophisticated health advice. I think, Stephen, in hindsight, what we actually saw was panic. Panic that fed off media hysteria and fear that gave a small number of people, Berejiklian, Chant and Hazzard, the opportunity to say, look, everyone is fearful. This hysteria is out there. We can basically tell them to do anything and the public will follow. And that's what happened. So I look, if there's no health advice from the vaccination companies that they're going to stop the spread, and Chant couldn't point to that, if their assessment, COVID contact assessment of the health minister, not the cleaner in Parliament House, not the catering staff, the health minister, was 27 words of scribble. They didn't even mention his contact with Adam Marshall, who was infected. The whole thing increasingly looks like one massive joke on the people of New South Wales. It was like a prank where these power-hungry individuals thought they could just boss everyone around and never be accountable for it. I don't think there is health advice that's worth the paper it's written on. Not that I've seen so far.
Wow, and it affected so many people's lives. Sorry, Rebecca, I know you probably want to jump in because it's big topic for all of us. But I just want to bring up to Chris Minns was also jumped on the bandwagon. So he, thinking being the opposition leader, would call these guys out earlier on this. And he was saying that we should follow the health advice from Dr. Kerry Chan. And if she said to lock us all down again, that if he was in power, he would do it. So that's on public record in an interview that he did. Don't you think that he should have found out about this stuff earlier, that there was no real health advice, and actually called them out on it?
Of course, but Chris Minns, along with the entire so-called opposition, were willfully blind. And if Kerry Chan told Chris Minns to go jump off a cliff, he would. The guy is willfully blind to what's gone on. And in the New South Wales Parliament, the only people who've raised any of the issues about the falsification of data, the absurdity whereby you were classified as a COVID case in hospital if you'd had COVID any time in the last 28 days.
Yep.
The issue I'm raising now, and have raised consistently at estimates, the only party that's raised any of these issues in terms of holding them to account is One Nation.
Yep.
And we'll continue to do that because clearly the opposition doesn't do its job, the media doesn't do its job, and the Greens certainly don't, do this as a minor party. So it's left to us. And can I just mention the Greens? We've had this fiasco of Lydia Thorpe and the association with the bikie guy. But in our parliament, the Greens beat their chest about accountability, like they're big crime fighters are going to hold the big parties to account. I sent a letter to David Shoebridge, the chair of the Public Accounts Committee in the Upper House, outlining this whole scam and fraud by Brad Hazzard. And you know what he said at their committee meeting? This is Shoebridge, who make out he's some big accountability, integrity guy in state parliament. He said, can we just get Brad to answer this so we don't have to pursue Latham's matter? That's how much they cared about it. They basically write a blank cheque for Hazzard, Berejiklian and Chan to do whatever they wanted. Chris Minns has been in on it. One Nation, there's 2 out of 135 MPs in the New South Wales Parliament. And on this issue, our 2 have done more work than the other 133 combined.
Wow. And well, there you go, public. That's One Nation, because I'm getting people on my social media asking me, why, how can we get more strength to One Nation? And I said, well, we are doing the best we can. And, it's our duty to put issues forward. It's our duty to make awareness of bad policy or make amendments to policy so that it's better for the people. And that's our duty. I remember Rod Roberts told me about that. So, that was, so that you can see people what actually One Nation, the 2 members of One Nation are actually doing in New South Wales Parliament, just from what Mark was saying then.
And we do it on other issues, energy policy, education, law and order. We're basically fearless. We're not beholden to any interest group. We're not sucking up to the media, mainstream media. We're after the facts. We're after the truth of what's gone on in all these areas where, basically, say on energy policy, Labor, Liberal, National Party, Greens are all in bed with the big renewables companies. Whatever the renewables want, they get. On education, the Greens and Labor are in bed with the Teachers Federation. We're the party that puts these interest groups aside and goes for the mainstream common sense policies that would actually work in practice. And if someone's upset about what we say, but it means we're getting results for the people of New South Wales, then I say, good, be upset. But we're there to get results for the people on all these issues that matter to working families in the suburbs and regions. And, we punch well above our weight. We've got 2 members of parliament, but we do the work of many scores of MPs from the major parties who effectively just bludge on the system.
Yeah, the 3 of us have actually been in Parliament with you and Rod Roberts. We've seen how hard you work. How important is it with the state election coming up in March to get another 2 Upper House One Nation members in the Legislative Council?
Well, it's critically important. If we get another 2, we've got 4. We didn't run any candidates, obviously, 8 years ago in the cycle of people to be elected this time. We can only get extra people in, and anyone supporting One Nation knows that you've got 2 guarantees. The party will fearlessly fight for the truth. And the second guarantee is if you've got a concern, we will stand up for you and we'll fight hard for mainstream common sense policies that where Labor Liberal, National and the Greens have failed. People talk about coalitions in politics on the big issues, whether you're talking about schools, economic management, cost of living, energy policy, electricity bills going up, environmental scams. Essentially, Labor, Liberal, National Party and the Greens are in bed together. And so many issues are worked out. I've had people have got to understand how that place works, and it's not in the public interest. I've had examples where, say, I'm trying to hold the Education Minister to account. She will ring the leader of the Labor Party in the upper house and say, can you guys lay off on this issue? Don't vote with Latham's proposition because, we don't want to be supporting anything from One Nation. I mean, Labor and National Party in that case, Labor and Liberal and National, on so many issues are in bed together and there's no difference. So anyone who's voting Liberal and National who thinks you're getting mainstream, non-woke policies, well, think again. Their ministers ring up the Labor Party and say, help us to fight off the One Nation attack. We are the real opposition. We are, in many cases, doing the work on issues where traditional Labor voters think Labor's gone too far, the left too woke, and where the Liberal and National Party voters, they don't recognise their party anymore. Going 100% renewable energy, net zero, big budget deficits, all the woke agenda, the political correctness, the cancel culture. People like Matt Kean, Mark Speakman, Rob Stokes, ministers, Liberal ministers, they could walk into the Green Party room, state their beliefs, and everyone would say, oh, geez, you're to the left of us. So, people have got to understand how that place works. The cross-party coalition has almost made us a one-party state in New South Wales, and that won't change if Labor's elected. It'll only change if One Nation gets more representatives so we can truly hold them to account.
So back to the state election, Mark, you made an announcement a couple of weeks ago that you'll be running again in March once you step down from your current position. I've had quite a few people ask me about that. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for people that don't have a political background so they can understand what it actually means?
Yeah, well, I was elected for 8 years in 2019, so I wouldn't be up for re-election until 2027. 8 years is too long. How do you hold people to account? Theoretically, you can, not do a lot for 7 years, have a flurry of activity in your 8th year, and then be re-elected. So 8 years is way too long. Around the world, nobody that I know of gets an 8-year term. So in New South Wales, it's way too long. My judgment is, and I said this in 2019, is that I think 4 years would be a better measure of accountability. You should be up for re-election in 4 years' time so people can pass judgment. If they think I've done a good job, they can vote for me. If they think I've done a lousy job, obviously they'll vote for someone else. And that message you get from the people is the most important feedback in politics. So I've decided that just as members of the upper house resign after 4 years to run for lower house seats, I'm going to do it, but recontest the upper house seat and seek a renewed mandate from the people. I want to know, do the people support what I'm saying about energy policy, electricity bills, net zero, the education system, all the issues that matter to them? I want to give them a chance to say, yeah, we're supporting Latham and One Nation, or we'll vote for someone else. So I think that accountability is important after 4 years instead of waiting for 8 years. So it's not unusual that someone resigns after 4 years in the upper house. They normally do it to go run for a lower house seat, as Natalie Ward might this time, and Ben Franklin and Penny Sharp have done in the past. So that's not unusual. But I think it's important to seek to renew the mandate and support for One Nation. It hasn't been done in the past because people are scared of losing their spot. Well, I'm not scared of that. I'm more scared of allowing Labor, Liberal and National Party and the Greens to keep running the state instead of having improved One Nation representation.
Okay, so with your current term though, Mark, once you step down, just to say, because obviously a lot of supporters have said, well, what happens if Mark doesn't get re-elected? They're a little worried. What happens to the remaining 4 years if that's the case?
Oh, well, the party will nominate someone to fill the vacancy, just as they do. When Linda Volz was elected to the seat of Auburn 4 years ago, her upper house seat was filled by Rose Jackson from the Labor Party. And since then, we've had John Ajaka, David Shoebridge, Trevor Khan, Don Harwin, a couple of others. So what's that, about 7 or 8 have resigned from the upper house, and they their vacancy gets filled by a representative from their party. So that's not unusual either. What I'm basically saying is that I think upper house members, party leaders in particular, should be elected every 4 years instead of every 8, which is way too long for the public to have to wait to pass judgment.
So you're holding your record to account, but what about the government? They've broken their own Fiscal Responsibility Act. For a lot of people out there, they wouldn't even understand what that means. Can you just explain what that is?
Well, they legislated under Mike Baird rules about how you run the budget to stop big budget deficits. Matt Kean's now got us into $182 billion of deficit, and the interest payments on that alone in New South Wales are more than we spend on the police force or TAFE. So the interest bill on Matt Kean's debt is astronomical, and they breached their Fiscal Responsibility Act because they're not supposed to spend more than the long-term average of revenue growth in New South Wales, and they breached that 3 budgets in a row, and you might as well use that Fiscal Responsibility Act as toilet paper. It's completely useless now. So this is how bad their economic management is, their budget management, that they're breaking their own laws. They passed this Fiscal Responsibility Act as a law of New South Wales saying this is sacred, we won't be breaching it. They've now breached it 3 years in a row, and there's a 4th coming up. So you might as well chuck it in the bin. It's useless, and it's just a measure of how, just like Morrison and Frydenberg went on a crazy spending spree and our great-great-grandkids will be paying off that debt, the same is true in New South Wales. So forget about the Liberals as the party of fiscal responsibility, the era of John Howard and Peter Costello. These guys are spending like drunken sailors, and not even Labor, well, I was about to say not even Labor and the Greens. Labor would spend as much, the Greens, of course, would spend even more. So, we're the only party that's saying a lot of this expenditure is unnecessary, it's trying to buy votes, and we shouldn't pass on the intergenerational burden to our great-grandkids to pay off this interest bill and the debt that comes with it. We've got to get the budget back into surplus, follow the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and if you can't balance your budget, well, you shouldn't be in government.
But how do they get away with it? Because if I was to commit fraud or something in the real world, I'd be in jail. So
they say it's temporary, that the 3 or 4 years we'll get it, we'll fix it up in the 5th year. So they willfully breach their own laws. Again, which party has raised this at different forums of the parliament? Only One Nation. Only One Nation seems to be worried about a government that breaks its own budget laws of New South Wales. Only One Nation is worried about the size of the debt and an interest bill that is bigger than what we spend on TAFE and also the New South Wales Police Force. So these are bad economic decisions, and a lot of it is just the most outrageous waste of money. Matt Kean spends $10 billion a year, for example, on green energy programs that don't do anything. You think that the poor deluded fool thinks he's saving the planet. He's not saving anything. He's just throwing the money down the drain. $10 billion on green energy. And even just today, the National Party, which specialise in pork barrelling, have announced a new funding scheme for people in the bush who go to TAFE to cover their transport costs. I mean, you might as well just put the cheque in the mail. They're just trying to bribe the voters. And I think that's a disgrace too. The National Party has turned pork barrelling into an industrial scale industry. And, people in the bush who've always prided themselves on being self-reliant and economically self-sufficient, proud people who don't really want government welfare, the National Party now says the only way we can win you, our woke policies are so bad and we've betrayed the bush on land clearing and water management and net zero. We've betrayed you so badly, vote for us because we're going to try and bribe you. That's what that once great party has become, a bribery factory.
Wow. I think the people would like to know, what are a couple of things that we could do as One Nation if we were in power to get the budget back on track? I know you've got a few ideas in the policy booklet that we've read, but they'd like to hear it from you, I think.
Well, get rid of the $10 billion on green energy programs that aren't saving the planet, that are just a complete waste. Go through all the pork barrelling schemes, all the infrastructure spending that's designed to prop up marginal seats. They're spending $13 billion on a metro from Badgerys Creek Airport to Stuart Ayres's electorate of Penrith that runs through cow paddocks. I said to the minister, that metro you're building through the cow and horse paddocks, it better have livestock carriages on it because they're the only ones around. There's no people who live there. So, the infrastructure misallocation is off the radar. Every major scheme should have a benefit cost analysis attached to it, so it stacks up. I mean, the thing about the taxpayer's dollar, people work hard to pay their taxes. People in Western Sydney or in the winter go to work in the dark, get home in the dark, and work hard in between. I mean, people work very, very hard to pay their taxes, and there's got to be respect for how it's spent. There's not money just there to buy votes and try and get yourself back into government. So all those schemes have got to be analysed, and there's massive savings to be made. Just about every other day there's an example of government waste. Some of it is not big expenditure, but it all adds up. They spent $90,000 for Glen Innes Council to build a viewing platform of a disused windmill blade in a park. This is a windmill that fell over. The blade smashed. Someone put it on the back of a truck and planted it in a park in the middle of Glen Innes. And now the taxpayer is funding almost $100,000 to build a viewing platform. Like, this is some sort of warped tourist attraction. Can you imagine the kids driving into Glen Innes saying, Dad, we want to go visit the broken windmill blades lying on the ground instead of KFC or McDonald's. Don't take us to McDonald's, Dad. We want to sit on the taxpayer-funded viewing platform and curb on the broken windmill blade. I mean, this stuff is just, as if they're writing a comedy, but it's with people's hard-earned money, taxes paid over, and you need an audit of all these programs to stop the waste, whether it's the $90,000 for the ridiculous viewing platform or the $13 billion for a metro line through cow paddocks.
Well, I've got an idea to spend $26 million and get Appin Road fixed down in Campbelltown. We need to get that one sorted.
Yeah, well, you're too practical and common sense, Adam. You want to spend money where it's needed. If you get into state parliament, they look at you like you're really strange.
Well, common sense policy just to help the people. I mean, geez, that's heaven forbid that, right?
It's the common sense is not very common in the New South Wales Parliament, I can sadly report.
Well, we're looking towards potentially a Labor government if you follow the polls. Now, if you go back to when you wrote the Latham Diaries, you kind of made a point of that the Labor movement is different than the actual Labor Party. Can you expand on what the Labor movement is and what it should be?
Well, the Labor movement are the unions plus the branches and parliamentarians from the ALP. But under Chris Minns, you've only got to look at the pre-selections they've been through to know that the party is lurching further to the radical left. Chris Minns is complaining about rising electricity prices. Well, he supported Matt Kean's policies 100%. We forced 180 votes, and every time Labor voted with Matt Kean. And they're rebuilding the entire electricity grid, costing tens of billions of dollars, and the public's paying for it. That's why it's not Ukraine. It's the fact we're rebuilding the entire electricity grid, a grid that used to give us the cheapest electricity in the world, and the public, the consumers, households and businesses, have got to pay for it. So Chris Minns has got a party that in policy terms has lurched to the left. It hasn't got solutions in the key areas of energy, economic management or education. But you look at their pre-selections, anyone who was traditional Labor right-wing, when I was in the Labor Party, I was traditional Labor right-wing. I was never of the left. But now that Sussex Street machine, they're all lefties. And they only had a handful of people who were genuinely traditional 1980s right-wingers inside the Labor Party, and they've been kicked out. Walt Secord, Tanya Mihalik, Guy Zangari, Nick Lalich. I can list on the fingers of one hand those inside the Labor Party who you'd think are socially conservative, fiscally prudent, and would fit into the 1980s, 90s Labor Party. So Chris Minns has allowed his party to lurch further to the left in policy and in terms of who they're putting up for the next election. So I fear a Minns government. Minns tries to look reasonable and presentable in the media, but he's got radical people around him. He won't say no to them. And the number of traditional right-wingers in the Labor Party has dwindled to next to zero.
And how did that happen? Because the Sussex Street machine was so strong. Like, the right faction was always the dominant one. How did it lose its influence?
Well, they had good right-wing policies to support, particularly in the time of the Hawke and Keating government. But that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And now their economic policy's been overrun by net zero and thinking that Australia saving the planet is more important than job creation. Their education policies are basically written by the Teachers Federation. They're failed policies. The kids aren't learning because the teachers aren't teaching effectively. So there's not a Labor policy that you'd regard as mainstream. Their environmental policies are just dreadful. They're basically saying that plants are more important than animals, and animals and plants are more important than human beings. So they've become a sort of light green party, you'd say. Labor under Minns and JD McKay have become light green. So if you're a working class person who doesn't believe in woke, doesn't believe in PC, doesn't believe in cancel culture, believes in free speech, traditional Australian values, like I've got something on my Facebook page just from yesterday. A school here in Camden, Spring Farm, is running Grandfriends Day instead of the traditional grandparents. I mean, what an insult to grandparents that you're now downgraded to be a friend. I mean, all that love and support so important within families. If I was a grandparent, I'd be, and most of them are, very angry that they're now downgraded to be a friend. I don't know who this is supposed to not offend, but what was ever wrong with the traditional Grandparents' Day? The Labor Party, I think this sort of rewriting of our language, rewriting of our values, rewriting of our thought process, it's a form of social control. The Labor Party thinks this is all great. You know, they cheer this on. So I fear very much that a Minns government will take this madness even further.
Well, I think with that Grand Friends Day, I know that I was speaking to a young lady last night, actually, and she was raised by her grandparents because of, you know, the parents are working. Her parents had their own particular issues, and her actual grandparents raised her. So I think you're offending. I think you're trying to not offend the minority, but you're offending the majority by doing that.
Who is the minority? This is so typical of the left. We don't know who this minority, a minority that's about to be offended might be. Is it transgender people or foster families or something, or where the grandparents have passed away and someone else turns up? I mean, you know, there's plenty of weird people out there who love to be a grand friend and hang around with little kids.
I did read your comment yesterday, Mark, about the white van.
Yeah. Well, what is a grand friend? There's plenty of bad people out. I'd love to be there. I'd love to be a grand friend of little kids. Well, I don't think we should be encouraging that. We should be saying to children, look, grandparents are important in your life. You love your grandparents, they love you. And this is a Grandparents' Day where they come and find out something about your schooling. So we don't even know who supposedly is going to be offended. What we do know is that the grandparents have been excluded from the title of the day. That instead of being a grandparent, you're downgraded to be some unspecified grandfriend. So it's an insult to millions of people in New South Wales, grandparents. Meanwhile, only a tiny number of unspecified people who might be offended somehow feel better about this weird title of grandfriend. So it's so typical of the left, supposedly including a small number of people that we really don't know who they are and excluding the great majority of society who've done a wonderful job as grandparents, loving and supporting their grandchildren. Isn't that just so typical?
It just seems to be anything.
And the other point, can I just say, the other point is we hear that teachers are always so busy. Teachers are overworked. Well, some idiots at Spring Farm Public School have had the time to sit around and say, oh, well, Grandparents' Day, it's got all these problems attached to it. We're inventing Grandfriends' Day. I mean, these teachers must have plenty. They come up with so much woke rubbish inside the school. They've got too much time on their hands. Get back to basic education. Forget about rewriting the English language. You're not intelligent enough to do that. You're not getting the school results to warrant that. Just stick to your job.
Yeah, that's right. And sorry, Rebecca, that's my fault.
I was just going to comment and say you can just anything of traditional nature or traditional values is what is attacked. I mean, I read last night that the Queensland Labor government are now passed a legislation to change maternity leave to long birthing leave. So again, you can see it's just constant attack of traditional values. So
long birthing leave. Long birthing sounds like, you know, a birthing that went for a couple of days. Where
it's like a ship.
Some of it's not a woman doing long birthing.
The mother's gone through agony, and partway through it, she's, you know, given the husband or the partner a gobful that he's responsible for the fact that she's in agony. Long birthing leave. Oh, I mean, look, are these people, whoever elected any of these people to rewrite the English language, what was ever wrong with calling it maternity leave? What was ever wrong with having a Grandparents' Day? Did anyone ever go to Grandparents' Day and say, oh, this is bloody terrible. I'm going to fall apart. I'm going to collapse on the ground here because it's called grandparents. No normal, sensible person ever identified a problem. And these woke elites, unelected, are out there trying to rewrite our language. Well, obviously in One Nation, we're dead set against that. We don't see any problem with traditional Australian values, traditional discipline in the home and in schools, and traditional ways of thinking and speaking. Australians want to speak their mind, you go for it, and we should always be doing that without these woke elites trying to control how we think and how we talk.
And there's also a saving in there as well, Mark, because, those bureaucrats rewrite the language and then the taxpayers fund all the lessons and classes in the public sector of them talking about what words to use and what not words not to use, don't they?
Oh, they're always rewriting things. When they have the Gay Mardi Gras, the New South Wales logo, government logo, which is a waratah, becomes the rainbow waratah. and they have to rebadge it on all the websites and letterheads. So you can save a lot of money just by sticking to your day job. Yeah. And who thinks of this stuff? Why does the rainbow waratah make any difference at all to anyone? I mean, they're going to have the Mardi Gras parade, I hope it's a happy time and people dance and have fun, but nothing is added to by the government having the rainbow waratah, changing the side of buses and other things. I saw some police cars in Camden recently that had Indigenous patterns on them.
Yeah.
Well, that costs money. How does it add to anything to have Indigenous patterns? I asked the police minister, is the Indigenous pattern meaning that the police car will only arrest Indigenous people or let them off?
Well,
and he said, "Oh no, it's about building better relations with the Indigenous." Well, I'm sure the Indigenous, if you're black or white, if you committed a crime, the last thing you want to see is a police car. No matter the pattern that's on it. So how impractical is this? The fire and rescue, another one that was sent to me on Friday, the fire and rescue for Mardi Gras have now got epaulets. The things the stripes they put on their shoulder? Rainbow epaulette is being used. Now, I thought firefighting and rescuing people was serious business and had nothing to do with identity politics. Just get the job done, and that's how most firefighters look at it. They're offended by this. But somehow they're becoming a billboard for a political statement about the rainbow epaulette. I mean, some of this stuff, these woke elites are essentially freaks who've got too much time on their hand coming up with stuff that can only be described as weird and distracting and a waste of money.
Yeah. Yet in New South Wales, we have the fastest falling school academic results in the world. Is that right?
Yeah, we do. That's what the curriculum reviewer, Professor Masters, said, that over the last 20 years, our results have declined, the fastest falling in the world, not just Australia, in the world. The PISA international results show that we're 4 years behind China when it comes to maths for our 15-year-olds, 3.5 years for science. Some recent data shows we've got about 19,000 students starting high school every year that are semi-illiterate, can't read and write to a decent standard. The government itself has said that for HSC and NAPLAN achievement this year, the targets they set, 2/3 of the school weren't going to reach the target. Does the government then say schools, you've got to try harder and develop better learning programs? No, they postpone the targets until after the election. So they'd rather get rid of the targets than improve the system. So, and the stuff is crazy. We had budget estimates with the head of the school system, and I raised this problem of 19,000 students starting year 7 who are semi-illiterate. And I raised the example, it's in the electorate that hopefully Adam's going to win, Lumiere High School, where they're teaching gender stereotypes in year 7 English. They look at pictures of how women have been depicted in the media over the years to see the changing nature of those depictions. How does that help those kids learn to read?
Well, and I've got to say, I've also done work in that school, just work in that school for blinds and stuff like that. And that school needs so much more investment than that kind of thing. That would be on the very last of the list that you could have, and that demographic in that particular school, is very, very low. So it does definitely need a little bit of work, and and I'm sure they could spend money elsewhere on maybe getting extra teachers in there to help the kids who are struggling with mathematics and literacy.
But how does looking at the media's depiction of women since the 1950s, Why is that English? That's politics. That's identity politics. Isn't it? Gender stereotypes, gender studies. I mean, if you want to do that as an adult, you go to university or you're in your 20s, you knock yourself out, study those pictures and until you fall asleep. I don't care. But the responsibility in Year 7 English in a school where the reading results in NAPLAN have dropped 20 points over the last 8 years, and they're below the national average and below the average for schools with similar types of students, it's a crime against those kids not to be teaching the basics of reading, and give the parents a guarantee every single child can read and write in Year 7, instead of studying pictures of how the media depicted women in the 1960s.
Yeah. I mean, that could be in some sort of social studies or something like that, not in English.
Well, I don't even know why it's social studies. I mean, it's our identity politics and trying to prove gender stereotypes. But so what? I mean, there would be many kids at that school looking at their NAPLAN results in Year 7 who haven't got decent reading and writing skills. Now, the school has got to focus on that, and it's what I said early on. The students aren't learning because the teachers aren't teaching. They're teaching political woke rubbish instead of the basics of how to read.
So we're getting to the end now because we know you have to run off to Sky News. We know we're the opening act for tonight, but hopefully you do get re-elected in the upcoming election. Do you have any main achievements that you wish to achieve in your next term of Parliament?
Well, we want to change energy policy to have a focus on the things that have worked in the past, coal and gas, electricity generation plus nuclear. We want to increase electricity supply. The Labor Liberal National Greens policy has put all the eggs in the renewables basket, very, very expensive, and that's why the prices are going up. But if you increase supply, New South Wales is a global energy superpower with flourishing coal, nuclear, gas and renewables. Well, increased supply, obviously you're putting downward pressure on the prices, so that's critical as cost of living relief. But the other big one, obviously, for the future of the state is to fix up the education system. We can't go on with fast declining results. We know what works in the classroom, and we've got to ensure we've got teachers and school leaders who apply the things that work. Direct instruction instead of woke rubbish programs, phonics in literacy instead of whole word, and schools that are accountable for their results. If you're not getting the results and you're keeping poor kids poor out of school, well, we're going to find school leaders who can get results. There are some very good schools out there, some very good principals. We've got to make that universal and have zero tolerance of failing schools. So all that work that we do is critical, and it's ongoing, and there's so much work to be done that over the next 4 or 8 years we'll be hard at it.
Yeah.
And do you want to make just a quick comment about Rod Roberts, who's been your partner in the Parliament for the last 4 years?
Yeah, Rod's been fantastic. He came in without direct party political experience, but he's now one of the most respected members of the upper house. When he speaks, people listen. His contribution's always valued. It's well researched and thorough. And he's typical of the sort of person that One Nation will be running at the next election. People who have got life experience. Rod, served fantastically as a police officer and a police instructor at Goulburn, and focuses on all those law and order issues that he knows inside out. We've got representatives who come from life experience, traditional Australian values, work hard in the Parliament and bring those common sense mainstream policies to the parliamentary debate. He's been fantastic, and if we had more Rod Roberts running next time, we've got some very good people, then anyone supporting One Nation knows that you're supporting quality.
Excellent. Well, I know we're almost at the end.
Sorry, Adam. So one more thing. We know regardless of the outcome of the state election, whether it's Liberal or Labor, it's going to be a left-leaning government. Obviously, the best outcome is that we do get 4 in from One Nation in the upper house. Just so that our viewers can understand a little bit, what does that mean for One Nation and the Conservative voters if we do get 4 in the upper house, like holding the balance of power? What sort of things can we achieve by having the 4 elected?
Well, it's the upper house, but let's also try and get One Nation people in the lower house and have balance of power there as well. What it's basically saying is if you're a right of centre voter, if you believe in the basics in education, an energy system based on increasing supply and bringing the prices down, if you're non-woke, you look at the madness going on, like our slogan is that we're fighting the major party madness. All of those things, if you believe in those traditional Australian values and freedom of speech, then you've got to realise that obviously voting Labor and Greens is throwing your vote down the drain. But voting Liberal and National, you might as well be voting for left-wing policies, because that's where Matt Kean and Speakman and Stokes and these people are coming from. So if you want a traditional right-of-centre, mainstream, common-sense alternative, and you know that you'll elect people who fight hard for those things, that just don't go in there and sort of lounge around the parliamentary bar, that every day we're fighting and scrapping and doing everything we can to represent people who support us, then you get value for your vote. You know, I know people are disillusioned with politics, but with our team, you get value for your vote. You get people who fight hard on the things you believe in. And wasting your vote with the major parties just encourages them to get even worse in the next parliamentary term.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for coming on and giving us your time. We all appreciate it very much, and hopefully we can have you on closer to the election when things really start heating up.
Yeah, you're happy to do that. We've got to get people like Adam in Campbelltown, Rebecca in Wollondilly. You know, these are seats where people look to One Nation, and we want good upper house representation to have a balance of power to stop a left-wing government getting more madness through the parliament. The balance of power is important, but let's also try and have that balance of power in the lower house as well.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Mark. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it around, spread the word, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks guys.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Mark. Bye.